Hello and welcome to part two of my response to Kayse Melone's video, I Escaped Conservative Christian Indoctrination. And if you haven't seen part one, go check it out. And just to let people know, if you haven't seen the first one yet, I'll just say that even though I am a conservative Christian, I agree with most of what she says, because a lot of what she says is not biblical Christianity, in my opinion. And so one of the things on my channel that I have done videos on is critiquing traditions that I don't think are biblical. And and I agree with some of the issues that she brings up. Other things I think is biblical that she's doesn't agree with, but I'm honest about that as well. So this is not an attack video on her. It's not a criticism of her. I'm actually trying to show the difference between what I believe is true biblical Christianity and some of the things that she is objecting or has left, escape from when it comes to this. So, all right, so we're going to look at part two now, and I will continue. We're about 18 minutes into this video so far. So let's just proceed, and I will pause from time to time.
And in stark contrast, only about 10% of Black Protestants in this country do. And that's not just a difference in political preference, I would say. I think it's a window into two entirely different lived realities of Christianity in America. White evangelicalism has long been entangled with imperialism, with the project of American nationalism.
That is a problem. I don't know if that is the general idea. Like the groups I've grown up in personally, and I'm speaking for myself, have been very critical of America, and they are today as well. But I don't know that Christian nationalism is really, I mean, I've seen that. It definitely exists within the church, that kind of thinking. What I'm trying to do here is test the audio before I go too far, because I recall the other day, the first time I tried to do this a week ago, it did not share the audio, but now I'm having a hard time finding the video on here on my phone. So I apologize. I'm trying to, let's see, hold on. Let me get to it. And wait, let me try Meet. Okay, here we go. All right, I'm going to test this real quick before I proceed.
It's a version of Christianity that has often prioritized order over social justice, or hierarchy over liberation, or power over empathy. We are seeing Christian leaders literally call empathy a sin. And guess what? The ones I've seen are white.
Okay. She said they call empathy a sin. Maybe there might be some pastors that say that. I've never heard a pastor say that in the circles I've been in, and I'm not suggesting that that's not true. And if they do say that, I completely disagree with it. And most Christians I know do as well. No Christian I know says that we should be against empathy. And if they do, the Bible definitely doesn't say we should be against empathy and that empathy is a sin. What I will say is that perhaps the circle she grew up in did say that. I don't know of any specific pastor that has, but then again, there's a lot of pastors out there that say things that are insane. So, so I just wanted to respond to that real quick.
From the moral majority to Christian Zionism to the modern day crusade against the so-called woke mind virus, white evangelical spaces have been shaped by a theology that happens to protect whiteness, wealth, and patriarchy?
Again, I don't know which churches she's referring to when she's talking about whiteness, because even there's I know that they're probably out there, but the majority of churches, even the bad ones, are not racist and they're not white supremacy kind of mindset. I don't know where she's getting that from. Maybe in her circles, that was what she experienced. But the majority of churches, whether they're good or bad, are not, white exclusive or anything like that. So I'm curious about which churches these are. That if they, I would assume that they're very fringe. That would be my assumption. So, but maybe she was in one of those churches. I don't know. So I'm curious as to which church she came from and like is teaching like white something, whatever that means.
And it makes sense then that a candidate who centers his message on grievance, on hierarchy, on nostalgia, on authoritarianism would find his base there. Meanwhile, Black Protestant traditions, especially those rooted in the Black church, carry very often a different theological legacy. And obviously, I wasn't raised in that environment, but my understanding is that these are communities that have historically used faith not so much as a tool of control, but as a means of survival and resistance. Black Christian churches have often emphasized liberation theology or social justice. So when people ask, how can both of these groups call themselves Christian? The answer is, in a lot of ways, they're not practicing the same version of Christianity.
Okay, so first of all, there is corrupt pastors in the Black churches too, and white churches, and there's good pastors that are on, both as well. So what she's probably referring to is that most of the quote unquote Black churches tend to be more liberal or Democrat, and most white churches tend to be Republican. That's probably true, generally speaking. And so, but I can tell you, Tony Evans, well, he's stepped down recently. I guess he's retiring. I don't know what else is going on there, but Tony Evans is, I think, more conservative as far as I could tell. Now, if you watched my first video, you know that I never was a Trump supporter. That's what I said in the first one. But I also admit that most Christians are Trump supporters. So I'm not disagreeing with what she's stating as far as the general idea. And I've also told you in the first video who I think Trump might be. So this video and this response is from me. And in some cases, I'm agreeing, like in many of these things, I'm agreeing that is true about the church. So as far as this goes, yes, politically speaking, it is true that even, Black Christians tend towards the Democrat Party, and white Christians tend towards the Republican Party. That is true. So, yeah. But again, when I'm talking about the truth, I'm talking about the Bible and not necessarily the way it's expressed in certain circles. So I'm looking at it from a non-traditional perspective, but what does the Bible actually say about certain things?
And that disparity tells us something. It tells us that Christianity in America is not one faith, it's multiple theologies in conflict. And this is one of the critiques I have of organized religion as a whole. And if we want to understand how religion is being used to uphold authoritarianism, we need to be honest, first of all, about which version of it is doing that.
Yeah. So I did this whole video on systematic theology and all these denominations and everything. And so I can see where she's coming from there. When I was seeking the truth, now the first thing I wanted to know is the Bible true? and I became convinced that it is. Second thing I wanted to know is which version of Christianity is true. And I realized the best way to know that is, what does the Bible say? Now, everything I said is logic, whether you agree that the Bible is true or not. If the Bible is true, it's logical to note that the truth is in the Bible, not in a certain denomination. And the problem with denominationalism, it's not to say that they're not good Christians in all of these denominations, but that a denomination will lock people in a theological box. And so they're kind of not allowed to get outside of that. And if they do, they either have to keep quiet about it or switch churches. And and I like the freedom to study the Bible and see where it takes me, and not feel like I'm pressured within a denomination. So I'm not sure where else she's going to go with this, but I just wanted to pause there and say that the reason there's denominationalism is because over time there have been people in the church's histories that were, I guess they might have been charismatic speakers, coming out and speaking boldly and creating followers. Whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. But whenever there's a bold, powerful speaker that gains a following, or with their writings they gain a following, it will tend to become a movement. And then that movement grows over time. And sometimes it dies off, but sometimes it continues on. And there's been many of those. And if they're off a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there, then you start to have various branches off of that. And I think in some ways it gets further away from the Bible, and other ways it's getting closer to the Bible. But that kind of gives you an idea of why there's so many denominations. It has nothing to do with the true Christ and the truth of the scripture or the Bible or what it says. It has to do with these movements that have occurred. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't believe God is a God of confusion, is what it says in the Bible. The confusion comes from deception and varying off into various things. And then you end up with different understandings. That's what I believe has happened over 2,000 years of the church.
The heavy lifting and why that might be, okay? It's true that I do critique Christianity as a whole, but my issue with it, again, is not the everyday belief of individual Christians. It's how the beliefs of everyday Christians, particularly white Christians, are being manipulated to uphold the power dynamics that pit people against each other. Okay.
And I mentioned this in the previous video, and I'll say it again here. That kind of pitting people against each other exists no matter which side you're on any issue. So whether it's political, religious, whatever. And so the question is not like, is there division and are they pitting us against each other? The question is, what is truth? And that's where I come, the perspective I'm coming from is, what is the truth? Not, and also I totally agree that propaganda is a problem in the church, as well as every other facet in society. It's a problem with the media. It's a problem with politics. It's a problem with education. It's a problem with the healthcare system. It's a problem with a lot of things. In entertainment, there's propaganda. So regardless of which side you come from, of which view you hold to, which political view, which religious views, whatever you believe, there's going to be propaganda. And first of all, I agree with free speech, but I disagree. So free speech means that people should be allowed to say what they believe. And so I totally defend that to a fault, regardless of whether I agree with them or not, as long as they're doing it in a peaceful manner. What I disagree with is, like she said, propaganda is telling people what to think rather than how to think. And I wish that churches would teach people more how to think in many cases than what to think. And that comes to doctrine. But when it comes to, is the Bible true? There's ways of researching that and using your own mind the way I did to conclude that it's true, versus me just, like, if I was leading a church, it wouldn't be helpful for me to just say, believe it because I'm telling you to, or because the Bible says. No, I think that the church needs to do a better job of saying, this is why it's true, right? And I think every movement should do that. Like, if they have if Islam wants to defend their faith, the best way to do it is not to kill people that leave Islam. And that happens way too often. And even in Christian history, there were crusaders, and there was, unfortunately, these institutions, I'm not going to call it the church, were killing people for not following the Pope or whatever. And I don't consider that the true church myself. But the point is, propaganda is a problem when you're telling people what to think rather than how to think. And that's true in education. It's true in churches. It's true in the media. It's true in other religions. So I just wanted to state that again in this second video.
Okay. And this kind of brings me into the prosperity gospel, because, again, as I was growing up in the evangelical Christian church, we were literally told that if we tithed faithfully, God would bless us financially. And that.
So the prosperity gospel is something that most good biblical churches teach against. And unfortunately, it is a popular thing within some churches. And I think it's totally unbiblical. So I totally agree with her on the prosperity gospel. And it sounds like the church she went to was pushing the prosperity gospel.
That if someone wasn't doing well in life, it's because they weren't enough of a believer. We were told that giving money to the church was a way to invest in our own personal success. Meanwhile, the pastors were living, yes, in like $1 million homes or whatever, and driving luxury cars, while again telling poor people to trust God with their finances. It was a pyramid scheme, and it worked because it was framed in a sense of the holy, of the sacred, of the spiritual. Okay, because it used the language of righteousness to reinforce the logic of capitalism, placing blame on poor people for their poverty. Okay. And if you didn't get rich, well, clearly your faith just wasn't strong enough.
Okay. So I completely agree with her on the prosperity gospel and these pastors and evangelists that get rich off of guilt tripping people and telling them to give money to the church and all that stuff. I agree with all of that. Now, as far as blaming people for being poor, there are some situations in which I think any logical person would look at that and say, that is, okay, so an alcoholic, a drug addict, somebody that's lazy, these people, now it is probably true that they could use some help in counseling, and maybe there's a way to rehab them and help them get back on their own 2 feet. But what I'm suggesting is that sometimes these things that people do it's their fault that they're poor because they're alcoholics, they're drug addicts, they're lazy or whatever. Or they have a bad work ethic and they're constantly getting fired. They can't get along with their boss. They don't want to, whatever. So I'm not suggesting that in every case a poor person is because of their own doing, but in many cases it is. Now, there are certain places and countries where there is a lot of corruption in the governments, and it's the government philosophy that keeps people poor. I think that our American political system has its flaws. I think it's, anyway, I don't want to get into that, but I just wanted to state that both parties are corrupt in different ways. And but I think in other ways, I think we do have the freedom to, if we work hard, that usually we can. It doesn't mean we're going to be rich, and I've never been rich. Like I live month to month, but I work hard, and I haven't been without a job for 20 years plus. So, you know, I don't know, like, it is true. Anyway, there's, it's not to say that there's not a struggle in life, because there is. So, but I just wanted to make that clear. Now, the Bible also talks about giving money to widows, you know, and to the poor and all that stuff. So the Bible is not telling us not to give money to them. On the other hand, there needs to be some wisdom on, do we give cash to a drug addict? You know, do we give cash to an alcoholic, or do we give them food? Do we give them help to work through their issues so that they can get back on their own 2 feet, right? I think what I was just explaining is a little different than what the prosperity gospel is doing, where they are, these evangelists are getting rich by telling them that if they give more money to the church, that, you know, it'll come back to them and all that stuff, or they'll get healed or something like that. So, so yeah, I wanted to respond to all of that and agree with a lot of it, but also say that there is a personal responsibility sometimes that causes us to be poor.
It almost like spiritualized wealth inequality and blamed the victims of poverty for their own oppression. And this is where moral panics come in again, because when people start to question that system, when the cracks begin to show and people realize that they're not getting the material conditions they want, and it doesn't matter how hard they work, they're still not as successful as the people on top. That is when the leaders pivot and they find a new enemy and they create a new panic. For example, in the 90s, it was the gay community. Post 9/11, it was Muslims. Today, it's trans people, but it's always the same script. Okay. It's manufacture a threat based on fear of something that is a part of a different community outside of the centralized demographic of people you want to convince to vote for you. So in this case, white evangelical Christian.
Okay. Now, she brought up a few things, the LGBT community and all that stuff. There are churches that are hateful that I completely believe is wrong, like the Westboro Baptist Church and certain circles that have very hateful ways of dealing with that. There's also those who, so let me make a distinction here. I may have done this in the first video, but I'll do it again, just in case, because I don't remember everything I said in the first video. But there's a difference between hate and having a moral standard. So it's one thing. So, for example, I'm going to leave the LGBT thing aside for a second. If somebody's a vegetarian because they believe it's immoral to eat meat or to kill animals, right? First of all, I respect their conviction and their belief system because this is a free country. I may disagree with that, but I respect that. Now, if they were to push that on me and try to force me to live by their standards, that's a problem, right? So in a free country, we have these different groups that are out there that people can join, whether it's a church, whether it's a vegan society, whether it's a Muslim, group, or Judaism, or whatever it is, or an atheist group, environmentalist group, whatever that is. If you believe in something, you're allowed to both be in that community, but also you're allowed to speak out about it and proclaim what you believe about that thing, right? This is called being a free country, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Now, that's different than forcing other people to agree with you on that issue. So this can go in any direction we want. If we want to talk about veganism, if there's a vegan community out there that believes it's evil to eat or kill animals, then they have the right to believe that. They have the right to speak out about it, but they don't have the right to force everybody to agree with them. In the church, it's the same thing. In churches, we have the right to believe something. We have the right to speak out about why we believe it, but we don't have the right to force people to agree with us and live like we do. And that's a difference. So there are Christian leaders that believe we should be pushing it and making it political and all this stuff and forcing everyone to live a certain way. But generally speaking, I think most churches just on a one-to-one level or with people, they say, this is what we believe is the best way to live, and this is why. And it's okay to do that, no matter what your belief system is, and then to have conversations. And and with the LGBT thing, so I'll come back to that. Most churches I know that believe it's a sin do not hate that community. It's not our enemy. And from my perspective, they're not my enemy, just because I have a moral standard. And there's a big difference there. And I hope people can see the difference. And I would in no way say that there needs to be political action to force them to be straight or anything like that, or force them to be a Christian. I would never do that. At the same time, there has been things put into place where that line of thinking has been pushed on other people that don't agree with it, like in schools, for example. In public schools, children have been put this agenda of hormone blockers and gender bending and all that stuff has been pushed on children in schools. And that is also a problem. That would be no different than the school pushing Christianity, in a public school. And 50 plus years ago, 60 years ago now, prayer and the Bible was taken out of public schools. And the reason was because it was pushing one religion and all that stuff. And the argument was that this is not a Christian country, it's a free country. So why should other groups be able to push their agendas in a public school, right? So the way I'm looking at it is consistency and logic when it comes to this stuff. So I want to challenge anyone who is making these kind of arguments to think about it from all angles and what is consistent, and not just, focusing on one group of people.
Then you stoke the fear and you justify the control, and you frame it all as protecting the children. Whenever I hear a white evangelical start talking about protecting the children, I very rarely believe them. The kicker of all of this is that the people most hurt by these panics, by the moral panic that is constantly manufactured, are often the very children they claim to protect. Because any kid who grew up queer in the Christian church knows what I'm talking about.
Okay, so first of all, why are kids thinking about sex at all? That's I think that's what they're part of the protection that you're complaining about here. And I would say that the way that I look at it is that there are certain things that should not be pushed on kids. And it comes down to pushing this ideology. Now, it's between really the parents and the parents and their kids. Parents can raise the kids the way they want to raise them, right? So and it doesn't mean that I would agree with how other parents are raising their kids, but if parents are, pro LGBT and their kids say that I'm gay and all that, the parents have the right to handle that however they wish. And so do Christian parents. And if Christian parents believe that that's a sin, then they have the right to raise their kids the way that they believe. Now, once that kid turns 18, they can make their own decisions. But my problem is when people try to push one side or the other on kids, and let the parents have the most authority when it comes to their own children. I don't think you have the right to tell a Christian parent how to raise their kids. And Christian parents don't have the right to tell an atheist parent how to raise their kids. Now, they can have discussions with each other and say which one is better and believe those things. But yeah, so I think that this, as far as this fear goes, and children, it's the parents' objective to protect their kids the way that they believe they need to be protected, right? And they might be wrong, but a parent that loves their kids is going to love their kids the way they believe in, right? And that's the point. And I think once we get to this place where the government needs to step in and say, no, you can't do that unless it's abuse, then it's, then it's all of a sudden the government becomes in charge of the kids and not the parents. And then we're like authoritarianism. You talk about authoritarianism, then every family has to raise their kids the exact same way. And then, and the government then becomes in charge. And then you have basically a communist country. So do you want that? Or do you want to keep freedom in this country? And children that are being raised by their parents are going to be under that structure, regardless of what their parents believe. When they turn 18, they can choose to, if they don't want to follow their parents, they can do whatever once they turn 18. But yeah, so that would be my thoughts there. Yeah.
Or neurodivergent, or just generally questioning. Okay, these kids are constantly being forced into shame or into silence or sometimes conversion therapy, and in many cases homelessness. The reality is, let's be so for real, they're not protecting children. They're abusing them. They're indoctrinating them. They are grooming them to be obedient to a system that will exploit them economically, emotionally, and spiritually. And that
could be true. I mean, you could look at that from any angle, depending on what your belief system is. So the way you think, like, somebody else raises their kids, I may think it's not a good thing. But we're getting into the area of religious beliefs. If I were to tell a Muslim that they shouldn't raise their kids that way, it's the same thing. So, or if I was to tell an atheist you shouldn't raise your kids that way, that's abuse or whatever. We can look at it from different angles, but the point is to be consistent with this thinking.
indoctrination doesn't stop once you hit adulthood. It just evolves. It just becomes economic and political. Once you are of voting age, like it's a little bit more difficult to stop subscribing to this bullshit, to break free from it, because now you're a parent. Now you're passing it down to your own kids, right? You've become.
And indoctrination happens everywhere in every facet of society, as I've stated many times. If you're an atheist parent and you have kids and you're telling them there is no God, that's also indoctrination. So what's the difference? You know, like I said, the difference between indoctrination and teaching people how to think, and that's what she said earlier. And it's something that I'm learning how to do, is how to think. And I have many disagreements with my parents. Well, I mean, you know, we're still both Christian, but we have different views on many things. So the point is, yes, there's a difference between indoctrination and teaching somebody how to think. And so indoctrination exists in the church. That is true. It also exists in atheism, in communism, in socialism, in capitalism, in Islam, in whatever other groups you want to mention.
The compliant worker, and it's even harder to question the system. You become the voter who backs authoritarian policies out of fear. Okay.
Okay. So authoritarian policies. I'm just going to ask this question. And like I said earlier, I can mention certain things that Trump is pushing for that is authoritarian for sure. I'm trying to think of some examples off the top of my head, but I've kind of gotten like tired of paying attention to what's been going on. The biggest authoritarian move that I've ever seen was in 2020 when they enforced lockdowns. And that to me was way overstepping the Constitution, not allowing people to gather together and all that stuff. I never had a major issue with enforcing masks in private businesses and indoors. That's their prerogative. But then to enforce everybody to do it, or in places where it was enforced outdoors, that's insane. Thankfully in Texas, that was never enforced. And to enforce vaccines. It's one thing to choose to do that yourself and to freely do what you believe in doing. Now, just to be completely clear about this, the vaccine issue was divided within the church, within the conservative church. There were conservative Christians that believed that we need to take the vaccine. There's others that didn't want to. And there's atheists that didn't want to take it. So that has nothing to do, I don't think, with politics. Seriously, it doesn't have anything to do with politics. And in fact, Trump was pushing for the vaccine at the end of his 2020, I guess. So it wasn't really a left-right issue. It just, the media made it seem that way. But the whole thing about enforcing lockdowns, people trying to push to enforce vaccination, to me was authoritarianism, right? So I'm just using that as an example. And throughout American history, I can name many other things Trump has done, things Bush passed, like the Patriot Act, was a way of taking away our right to privacy. And I could go on and on about that. But the point is, it's not just these Christian groups that are being authoritarian. It's across the board. So I just wanted to state that again.
And this is why I insist on critiquing religion, even when people tell me to let it go. It's not, the thing is, for me, it's not just about whether or not people believe in God. And I think that that might be totally irrational. What I'm actually trying to critique is the machinery that belief gets becomes like a cog of. It's about the systems of power that use religious beliefs to justify harm.
Yep, I totally agree. That's called wolf in sheep's clothing, in my perspective. It's not. It's not. To me, it's not the church. It's not the biblical church. It's not the true church. There is a lot of authoritarianism and people using God for their own gain that exists, and I'm completely against that. And I want to call that out and be completely transparent when I say that is the worst. That makes me probably more mad than it makes her, because it defames Christ and it defames the truth, in my opinion, of what Christ taught and what the true Christians are doing. So I completely agree that people will use God for their own gain. That's called a wolf in sheep's clothing.
And that's where I draw a very firm line. We must critique the institution, the ideology, without dehumanizing the believer. Because again, so many of the Christians I know, including the ones I grew up with, are not malicious. They are kind, generous, thoughtful people who have been steeped in a toxic system. And many of them are already doubting. And yes, they need to be held accountable for, if they voted for Trump. I'm not doubting that. But I want to be there for these people who are already questioning, and maybe they just don't feel safe to say it out loud, or they don't want to lose their families or their communities or their entire social safety net, because I can attest to the fact that it's hard to leave the evangelical Christian church.
So questioning, okay, so I questioned everything and I was that close to leaving the church. I think I may have stated that in the last video. I'll say it again. I was that close to leaving in 2007, 2008, because I saw a documentary that challenged, it's called Zeitgeist, if it's on YouTube. And it basically made these claims that everything in the Bible is based on older pagan religions and the signs of the zodiac. So like the 12 signs of the zodiac became the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 12 disciples, or that the age of Pisces, Jesus brought in the age of Pisces because they made them fishers of men and all this stuff. And you can check that out. And that really caused me to question everything. And quite honestly, I was that close to walking away. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to live a different, under different, I didn't want to be under the biblical moral standards. But I stopped and I paused and I asked the question, all I really want is the truth. What is the truth? Not what do I want the truth to be, but what is the truth? And that was the beginning, I think, of my truth-seeking journey. And I was willing to go any direction that the evidence sent me. And so I will mention this again. I think I mentioned it in the first of these two videos, that I have a playlist called What is Truth? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. You can check them out. Look at the video titles. Most of those videos are not mine. They're other people's. And a lot of the things that convinced me that the Bible is true are there. So I would check those out if you're looking and questioning, and if you choose not to even watch, if you choose to not even go there and say, I'm not going to even watch it, blah, 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 then you're actually willfully being ignorant yourself. So I would challenge you to go check it out with an open mind. And I've looked at things from all angles myself. I've tried to look at things. I'm sure there's a lot of things there's not enough time in the world to look at everything. But if I'm considering something, I will look at it from all angles, and try to understand it the best that I can.
All right. 13 years later, and I'm still dealing with the ramifications of that. All right. And another factor in this conversation that I want to make crystal clear is that I'm not trying to ban religious practice. I'm not trying to ban belief. Again, this is about dismantling the machinery of control that hides behind that belief, that uses belief for power. It's about recognizing what authoritarianism needs to rise to power. Because,
and like I said, authoritarianism does exist within churches, but it exists throughout society, media, education, politics, etc. And what was I going to say on that? So I'm opposed to authoritarianism across the board. Even in the Bible, it says not to lord over others the way that it, So I totally agree that authoritarianism is not good in the church or anywhere else.
Because sometimes it really just needs a pulpit. It needs a Bible verse to convince people. It needs a really powerful praise and worship service. Okay.
Sometimes a Bible verse out of context leads to something that is not good. So it's important to look at the whole context of things. And so I've seen the Bible being misused quite a bit by taking some verse out of context.
Okay. And before you know it, you're singing along to the system of control you claim to protest. But okay, again, like I want to be clear, I'm not talking about personal spiritual transformation. Okay. I may be an atheist, but I do consider myself spiritual. I love the spiritual, not religious community. I totally.
So I would just be cautious with that because there are good spirits and evil spirits. So there's a lot of movements, like in Barnum, for example. I remember seeing a whole section of witchcraft type stuff, and of course they've renamed it different things, and people say that's not witchcraft, it's named other things. So these are all things. Witchcraft is basically anything that conjures up demonic entities or spirits or actions. And so, but they use different terms. And a lot of it has infiltrated the New Age movement. So some people may consider themselves atheists, but they get into these kinds of things. So being spiritual may not be good if you're dealing with the wrong kinds of spirits.
Vibe with that. What I'm talking about is institutional religion, structures built to consolidate power and force orthodoxy of any version or flavor, and that determines who gets to speak, who must stay silent.
Thankfully, we live in a country that's free. So in other countries, there is enforced indoctrination, whether it's Muslim countries. In the past, we've had countries that were that way, authoritarian and enforced a certain religion, which is why America started in the first place, was to get out from under the Church of England or the Roman Catholic Church and to be free to believe however we wished. And so freedom of religion is something that I believe that was started here more than any other place. And so while there are Christians out there that believe that America needs to become a Christian nation again, if it ever was one, I would argue that the Bill of Rights has kept us as a free nation, even though maybe at times they didn't really follow that, and they would persecute people that were not Christian here. Now, I don't know of every individual case. Sometimes those stories get twisted over time to push an agenda. So we need to make sure we know the facts when it comes to those, like killing witches in the last few centuries here, and why that happened. Maybe the stories have been twisted to push an agenda. We don't know. So yeah. And let me just be frank. I believe the best way to stop a witchcraft is not to kill them. It's to pray against what they're doing, against witchcraft, because Jesus is more powerful than they are. So I just wanted to state that. And my goal is not that any witch be put to death. My goal is that any witch would come to Christ. And I actually know somebody who was a witch, and saw all kinds of evil, corrupt, spiritual things, scary things happen. I mean, it scared her to death. And she became a Christian. When she called out to Jesus, it all stopped. All that scary stuff stopped. So the name of Jesus works. And so I'm passionate about that, and I wanted to make that clear. And so I kind of was getting off track there because I was talking about enforcing what she was talking about, enforcing a religion or killing people for not believing. And I don't think America is in danger of enforcing Christianity. If anything, it's in danger of making conservative Christianity illegal. We're probably closer to that than we are the other way. So,
because religion, when it's institutionalized, becomes the perfect format for authoritarian control. Why? Because it teaches people from the youngest age that there is one ultimate reality, one ultimate morality, and one ultimate authority. And not questioning that authority is dangerous. Okay. Does any of this sound familiar? Okay. Organized religion offers like a ready-made system for totalitarian regimes.
okay, many people leave the faith here in America, and I don't think they're in danger. In some cases they are, but those are cults. The New Apostolic Reformation, I've heard of people getting like hurt for trying to leave, or other institutions. Islam will kill people. Maybe not here in America, but in other countries. If somebody leaves Islam, they will get killed. Judaism, they will get like shunned by their family. And some Christians, they shun them too. But from my experience, most people that leave Christianity, the Christians in my circles have a heart for them. We don't hate them. I have a brother that's not a believer now. He's an agnostic, and I still love him. I still spend time with him. I still eat dinner with him. We'll hang out, whatever. We get along fine, and I respect where I respect in the sense that I'm not trying to, because he knows everything I know. We grew up together, and so I just let him know I still believe, but I still love him, right? And other cases, it may not work out that way. And I think even he and his has had some people shun him. So anyway, but I just want to make that clear. Again, it's one of those things that many religions shun people, and I don't think that's good. In Christianity, it's not good. But most Christians I know are still loving and respectful to those people that leave. Sometimes more so than they are to us. So we need to be consistent with all of these things that we're talking about here.
For systems of power. That includes patriarchal family structures, rigid gender roles, the demonization of outsiders, aka non-believers, and the idealization of suffering and sacrifice. It trains people to accept hierarchy as divine order. It replaces curiosity with doctrine. And I just think that it's a dream come true for any authoritarian leader, because they don't want you to think. They want you to comply. They want you to fall into line. And if you think that an eternity in hell is on the line, you'll do more than comply. You'll volunteer to defend it.
Okay. So I mentioned this some in the first video, and I'll say it again because she just brought it up again: eternity in hell. And I am convinced, after being taught that since I was 5 or 6 years old, I became a believer. And in the last 10 years, I started hearing this other view called annihilation, or it's either eternal life or death and the final judgment. And those cast in the lake of fire, their body and soul will die and not live forever. So basically, the concept that I believe the Bible teaches, because of my study of the Bible, is that God created us to have community with him, but he's not forcing us to have community with him. And anyone who desires to have community with him through faith will live forever. The rest will perish. And that's very simple. But so I think that's one of those teachings that has crept into the church over the centuries. And it really comes from Greek philosophy of the underworld and other pagan religions, I think. So the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced the Bible doesn't teach it, the more I think it's actually a doctrine of devils. And it does do, when you really think about it, the idea of punishing people and torturing them forever is pretty insane. So I will posit to say that, and it's not a popular view, the one I'm stating, especially in conservative Christianity, but I'm convinced it's what the Bible teaches. So I'm going to speak out about it here, at least.
Do you know what I mean? And that's the sinister aspect of religious authoritarianism. It doesn't need to rely on violence. It just needs to have like an emotional bug in your ear. It just needs to convince you just a little bit. And then you'll vote for the violence to be committed. It's so cyclical like this. And that's what
I don't know what violence she's referring to. I'm not sure what violence if she's talking about war, like I've been speaking out against our foreign policy for almost 20 years. I think we shouldn't be all over the world with our military and telling other countries what to do. We shouldn't be in the Gaza Strip. We shouldn't be involved with Russia, Ukraine. We shouldn't have military all over the world. We shouldn't have gone into Iraq 20 years ago, over 20 years ago now. A lot of things like that. That's my standard. As far as violence here, I've mentioned this before when it comes to free speech. I'm for free speech regardless of, for people's right to free speech regardless of what they're talking about or speaking out about. But I'm opposed to violence within that. Whether it's the setting buildings on fire by some people, and I want to distinguish that because most of the Black Lives Matter people were good, law-abiding citizens, peaceful, but then you had some that were setting buildings on fire. On the other hand, you have January 6th of 2021 when you had people protesting the election. And many of them were also peaceful protesters, but then you had some that broke into the Capitol building. And I believe those violent acts on both sides was controlled opposition because they want to create chaos. Order out of chaos is their motto. And a lot of these groups like Antifa and QAnon, I believe those are two sides of controlled opposition. That's a little rabbit hole I'm getting into. But when she talks about violence, the churches that I've been associated with, and most churches do not preach violence. Some of them do. I know the independent fundamental Baptists, Westboro Baptist, and churches like that believe in casting stones at gay people and all that stuff. So I'm not sure what she's referring to here. Maybe in the church she grew up in, they did teach violence. I don't think that's ever been taught in my circles that I'm aware of. And if anybody teaches violence, in fact, Jesus himself, or in the Bible itself, I don't remember if it's Jesus or one of the apostles said, our war is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers of the air, like these spiritual beings. So, evil spirits is our real enemy and not people. So, in fact, we're told if we're persecuted, if somebody hits us, to turn the other cheek. And I know that many modern Christians don't do that. Now, turning the other cheek doesn't necessarily mean to stand there and take abuse, but so protecting ourselves is one thing, but what the Bible tells Christians to do is to turn the other cheek. Maybe it's good to leave the situation so that you're not continuing to take abuse, but being violent towards others, that is not something, and aggressive towards others to get our way, is definitely not biblical. So churches that are teaching that, whatever they're teaching about that, I totally object to. And as far as voting for violence, I think both sides do that, really, in different ways. Although both sides also vote against it, depending on what you're talking about specifically.
I wish more people understood. All right. Because when the state or when any policies are framed as blessings or, righteous from the pulpit, protesting against those issues becomes blasphemy. And it's why the line between church and state isn't just a constitutional issue, it's a survival issue. Because once those lines blur, the reason I'm fighting all of this, once the state starts to look like God, there's no space left for questioning it. There's only
So America began to separate church from state. And that was, well, when it comes to the government becoming or pushing a single religious institution, that is what America, I think, one reason America said to split church from religion. Now, on the other hand, it's also true that the government should have no authority over how Christians or how religious groups believe, unless they're doing stuff like murdering people and like that kind of a thing, then that are illegal, right? And so I don't think there's any religion that's allowed in America to like sacrifice their children or something like that. And yet, well, that's a whole different topic. But my point is like separation of church and state means that religions should have the freedom to believe as they and speak and teach as they believe, regardless of what the religion is. So, yeah. Oops.
only punishment. That's what it was like growing up indoctrinated in Christian conservatism. Even now, we're seeing politicians use religious language to justify stripping away rights from marginalized communities, banning or trying to ban people who identify as trans, banning books, abortion bans. They're being pushed with the vocabulary, with the rhetoric of moral righteousness, but their true purpose is control. And when you grow up in a system like I was that teaches you to equate righteousness with authority, you'll go along with it no matter what. You'll cheer it on, you'll vote for it, you'll call it freedom while you're slowly just, gilding your own cage. And that's why I talk about this. That's why I won't just leave my upbringing in the past, because authoritarianism isn't some far off threat. Fascism isn't in the future. It's here. And it's wearing its Sunday best. And unless we recognize how deeply it feeds on religious structure, on the cultural ideologies that people adhere to, we won't be able to fight it. Not effectively and not fully, and definitely not in time.
So you want to fight people's right to believe the way that they believe? Like I said, I'm opposed to authoritarianism in the sense of giving people too much power. Now, there is the difference between that and having authority. I do believe that there's a place for authority, like a police officer or a teacher or a boss at work. But authority can be abused for sure, right? But the way that you're saying fighting against this seems to indicate that you want to take people's freedom away in some sense. And I can guarantee you that within churches, within the Christian circles, there are Christians that are fighting against this kind of like corrupt leadership and authorities. And thankfully, we live in a country with freedom to where people can walk away. And I understand that within that there are cults that make it more difficult to walk away. But as a country, there are legal protections for somebody that chooses to walk away from something. Scientology is another one of those that I've heard is very corrupt, and they will actually, hurt people that try to leave, I've heard. So very rarely, with a few exceptions, do churches try to hurt people for leaving their church. They may get shunned. They may, get discommunicated, whatever. It really all depends on the situation. But there are many times where they're still friendly towards each other, but they and friendly towards their Christian friends that they left. I have many agnostics and atheists that have left the church that are very friendly to me, and I get along with them fine. Then I have others, and I don't know anybody at least specifically with me, but I know other Christian friends that have people that have left the church that are really hostile towards them. And I'm sure that there are Christians that are hostile towards others too, or quote unquote Christians. But yeah, I mean, some of that is human nature, but yeah, I think in a free country, people should be allowed to leave if they so choose. And anything that you leave, whether it's Judaism, Islam, etc., you're going to have that same issue of being shunned or being, outcast or whatever from your friends and family that you grew up in those institutions. So some of that is human nature, right? And then in this country, you're not really supposed to be allowed to kill people for leaving your faith. But like I said, Scientology and maybe some other institutions that are really corrupt, it does happen.
And since it's already here. Again, deconstruction to me, it's not just about changing your beliefs. I'm not trying to change anyone's beliefs. I'm trying to dismantle the hierarchy. This is about challenging the systems, again, that tell you who you're allowed to be and how you're allowed to live. It's not about infringing on religious freedom. It's about reclaiming agency and voice and curiosity and the multiplicity of the human experience instead of pretending like our vastness as humans with conscious perceptions of this reality can fit into any box that a religious leader would like you to think it belongs in.
Yeah. So, well, in many cases, she did talk about those corrupt things that I totally agree with her on. But then in other cases, she was picking on certain things that the Bible does teach that she disagrees with, right? And so there's a fine line there where there were some times where she was attacking the belief system and not just the hierarchy. So I wanted to mention that right there. And if she disagrees with what the Bible says, I understand she doesn't believe what the Bible says is true at all. So she's going to pick on those things that she disagrees with. But people that believe the Bible is true, we need to be allowed to believe that. So, so I wanted to distinct those two things. There's a distinction between corrupt authoritarian institutions and freedom to believe things that maybe she doesn't agree with, or she is free to believe things I don't agree with.
Okay, that the guilt, the shame, the fear, all of those are tools of control every single fucking time. Every single fucking time. And this is not just for ex-Christians. There are all kinds of people who have been told to stay small, to stay silent, to submit. All right. Deconstruction is talking about any hierarchy, such as white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism, organized religion. Okay. Deconstruction is for the queer kid who was told they were an abomination. It's for the poor kid who was told their poverty was a lack of faith. Deconstruction is for the woman who was told her body was a temptation. Ugh. And it's for the kid who was shamed for being curious.
Okay. That's kind of a deep one right there. The woman being told, I was not, obviously, I didn't grow up as a woman, so I didn't, but I have sisters. I have 4 sisters, and I've heard their perspective on this as well. And I never really looked at it that way. When, as a guy growing up in church, we were always told it's our fault. For lust is our fault. We were never told that it was their fault. Now, what they're told usually by older women, so women would tell younger women. Now, sometimes it didn't, or fathers, but that they need to dress more modestly or something, right? And sometimes people can take that personally to say, when you do this, you're putting somebody else in temptation. People take that and they think, oh, it's my fault. And again, I was never, I was a guy. I was never told to dress more modestly that I can recall, with the exception of a ministry I was in where we had to wear shorts down to our knees. Like even the guys had to wear shorts down to their knees. But generally speaking, guys were not told to be more modest. And I don't know why that is, but that's just how it is, I guess. But I kind of equated this to like if I was a banker and it was my job to lock the bank, but I didn't lock it. Let's say I left the door wide open and I, it's nighttime and I go home and the bank gets robbed. I'm going to have to pay some consequences for that, even though I'm not guilty of robbing the bank. So now, so, and, that's a whole different issue, but I just wanted to say that, like, at least from my perspective, and I'm not a woman, it was never my thought process to say it's her fault that I'm, thinking whatever I'm thinking. No, it's never their fault. It's always my fault. And then when the older women are talking to the younger women, I think it's more of a protection than it is. And she, Kayse earlier talked about the guise of protecting children is actually abusing them or whatever she said. I think this is not just a Christian thing. I think that there is some wisdom in how somebody dresses and things like that. In fact, I disagree totally with, let's say, Islam, where they're covered from head to toe, even the face. The women are not allowed to be seen, really at all, especially if they're married, I guess. I don't know all their rules, but and of course it gets really shaky because when it comes to moderation or modesty, it is a little bit of a gray area because an older generation of women have a different idea of modesty from a younger generation, right? I've had some other people complain about somebody being immodest that I didn't think was immodest, but so it's kind of one of those things that's like, if somebody, an older woman is telling a younger woman, you're immodest, maybe sometimes there's a generational gap there as well. So that's kind of a complicated issue, I guess, but I just wanted to make it known that, at least from my perspective, I never blamed anybody else for for if I was improperly thinking about a woman. So I never blamed them. Maybe they took it that way when they were told to be more modest. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's something, another video for another time where I could have a lady on here talk about it from her perspective in the church. But yeah, I've heard that, that is something that's women will take, or girls will take personally and get the wrong idea of the purpose of it. And maybe some older women that tell them to, be more modest, do it in such a way that's kind of like mean. There's mean ways of telling people to do something that is not good either. So yeah, that's a complicated issue, I guess.
It's for all of us who were told to sit down, shut up, and obey. When I say I'm an atheist,
every parent says that to every kid, right? Regardless of what your religious belief is, every parent, unless you're just spoiling them to no end. Well, let me put it this way. Parents of every religious group or atheists or whatever will tell their kids to sit down and shut up. So to say it's a Christian thing or whatever, and also like they probably tell people that in business. If you're like in a business and there's a meeting and somebody's speaking out of line, they might be told to sit down and shut up. So I don't see there's like this structured way of doing things sometimes, and some things are more formal than others, and they just say, now is not the time to whatever, So I think that has more to do with the structure of a meeting or whatever. But then that attitude could exist in terms of telling people not to ask questions, which I think goes back to propaganda or telling people what to think rather than how to think. I know that exists in churches or in any circle of things. When people ask questions, they get ridiculed, right? When people ask questions about the vaccine and say, I'm not sure I trust this thing, they get ridiculed. Doctors would get fired for even asking those questions. If somebody's asking questions about Christianity and saying, how do we know that this is true? If a pastor or their parent or whoever says, shut up and don't ask questions, that's not the right way to approach it. So if that's happening, I know that happens in churches. I totally am against that. And so, yeah, there's different ways of looking at that. Sometimes there's an appropriate time for people to sit down and shut up, whether it's in work or religious institutions or school or whatever. But then there's a time to ask questions and be able to work through some things that you're, doubting or having issues with. So, and a good teacher is going to take questions, and there's no such thing as a dumb question. I once had a teacher where there was several times that I would ask a question and she would just stomp off and act like it was a dumb question. And perhaps it was. And sometimes I would think about it for a little bit, and then I would realize, oh, yeah, I could figure that out. But it wasn't a good way of teaching, because what ended up happening was there would be times I would have a question and I wouldn't ask, because I was like, so over the years after that was in third grade. And for years after that, I rarely would ask questions. I got terrified of asking questions. And I remember one time in that third grade class, I didn't ask something that was on my mind. So I didn't ask it. But the kid next to me raised his hand and asked the very question that was on my mind. And the teacher was like, really good question, really good question. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, that's a terrible way of teaching, right? Maybe they were dumb questions, but a good teacher is not going to assume anything is dumb, right? They might say, well, they might try to work you through it and say, well, let's think about this, right? And try to, rather than just walk off and like, you're an idiot, I'm not going to even, so I wanted to distinct between the differences. But when a teacher is having a lecture, that's not the time to necessarily, maybe there's a time where you're not supposed to raise your hand and ask questions. But after the lecture, or there's a time when the teacher wants people, or to start talking without raising your hand, right? There's proper way of doing things. So there's a difference between saying sit down and shut up. Sometimes that's a appropriate thing to say, or telling people not to think and don't ask questions, just shut up and just follow. And that I'm against. So let's keep going. I think we're almost a few more.
Some people consider that to be a very nihilistic perspective. Some people hear bitterness. Some people immediately equate that with being an angry atheist. And I get it. I'm not a generally chill person. But also, for me, atheism isn't about the absence of meaning or wonder. It's a way to reclaim it in a way that's not anti-spirituality. Okay, I'm just interested in spirituality that doesn't demand my obedience. Or
okay, I had to look this up because I'm an idiot. So I'm asking a dumb question. What is nihilist? So I'm looking it up. Nihilistic, rejecting all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless. Nihilist is someone who believes that existence is without objective, meaning purpose, or inherent value. Okay, so she's saying people might think she's a nihilist, but she's really not. I believe her. I'm not going to say. Sometimes her personality might suggest something, and I have a personality that might suggest something to people. So I'm just going to take her words at face value. So what did she just say? There was something else she just said that I wanted to respond to about, and I can't remember now. So we'll just keep playing.
Or demand putting me in a specific box. I'm not against faith. I want to make that very clear. I'm against faith that's weaponized to control people. I'm against faith being used to control people. If anything,
I remember now that she talked about she's against obedience. So I'm going to use logic here. And if you're going to use that logic, if you have children, and maybe some parents believe that it's wrong to tell kids to obey their parents. Like if a parent tells their kid, don't walk out in the street, like a 4-year-old, and the kid disobeys, and the parent runs out and stops them and disciplines them in some way, is that abuse or is that love? Now, that's people of all religions raise their kids in a similar way to what I just explained. There is a way of raising your kids and disciplining them. And there's different ideas of what good discipline is. And I'm not going to get into that here, but everybody from all religions, even atheists, raise their kids in a similar way because if they love their kids, and that's just one example. Don't walk out in the street, and if they disobey, you stop them and you discipline them in some way, and to teach them that there are consequences for that. Right now, as they get older, they shouldn't have to be told. As we get older, we know to look both ways for one thing. But when children, their brains are not fully developed yet, you have rules that need to be followed. Now, even as an adult, I would say probably shouldn't walk across the freeway. Although I've seen people do it, and I don't know if it's illegal or not, but if an adult chooses to do that, that's, at their own risk, I guess. But parents that tell their kids don't walk across the street, even just a residential street, there are rules for the protection of those kids that they love. So using that logic, what if there is a God? And this is just a what if for somebody that is now an atheist, or this video I'm responding to, or an agnostic, or if you're out there and believe in a different religion. But the question is not, do you believe in it? But what if there is? And I do believe in one, that this God also knows abundantly more than we do and has rules. Now, just like children don't know like the difference between the street and their yard, right? They just know there's a rule, but sometimes they're like, I don't know why my dumb mom or dad won't let me walk out on the street, so I'm just going to go. And then, or they try to sneak out there, right, when their parents aren't looking or something. But if somebody if a being, an all-powerful being created this universe and created us and has rules, and at least if the Bible's true, then this God is also loving, all loving, like God is love. That's what it says. If God is love and he has these rules, then these rules are really for our benefit. They're to protect us. Just like with children, you have rules to protect them from harm. Don't take candy from strangers. And some kids might think, well, does that mean they don't want me to ever have candy? Well, in my mom's case, that is true. She didn't want us to have candy at all. And some people think, well, they don't want me to have candy because they don't love me. Or they don't want me to take candy from a stranger because they don't love me. Now, see, a little child doesn't understand why that rule is there. But the rule is there to protect them, right? So some of the, if the God of the Bible is the creator of the universe, and I'm just asking you to consider how we think. I'm not trying to convince everyone to agree with me, but if the Bible is true and the God of the Bible created all things, and he is a God of love, then the rules that he has is for our benefit and protection, even if we don't understand them. So I just wanted to use some logic there to say that the way that Christians believe and follow in obedience to God is not because, it's, and that's different than being blindly obedient to a person at the pulpit, for example. The person at the pulpit should be under this, we should be able to hold them accountable if they disobey what God tells them to do or be as a leader in the church. So I do not idolize any person. So when I think of obedience, I think of the proper authorities. If you work in a company and you have a boss, there's a difference there between, you want to do a good job and keep your job, so you obey, right? Now, if your boss does something corrupt that you disagree with, then you have the right to report it, and maybe that'll cause you your firing. Maybe that you'll get cast out of that job. Maybe, you'll whatever. So, and I don't think any human being should have ultimate power on anything, whether it's a business, whether it's a church, whether it's school, whatever. However, there is a place for authority, not authoritarianism. So I wanted to distinct those two things. Authority is simply they are in charge of this institution, whether it's school, church, work, whatever, political organizations. But they should also be held accountable for their own actions. And so a good leader is somebody that has a high moral standard and does things the right way, that benefits all people, not just themselves. And not only places the rules on everyone for the benefit of everyone, a good leader I'm talking about, but they also follow it themselves, right? So that's the difference between authority and authoritarianism. And somebody who's at the, whatever you call the very top, should have a board of people that hold them accountable, not a board of yes men. And that's a totally different thing than having a board of accountability. And unfortunately, many situations, a CEO or a pastor has a board of yes men. So, let's keep going.
Say that leaving organized religion gives so many people more reverence for life, for more mindfulness in the moment, for the mystery of the universe and all of its complexity. I don't need to believe in an afterlife to love this planet. I don't need a God to practice compassion or kindness. Okay. And if your spirituality requires a threat of an afterlife spent in hell to make you a moral person, then maybe it's not morality at all. It's just fear.
Yeah, I would say that while many people stay in church and follow because of fear of eternal hell, there's also many people that leave the faith because of that teaching. And I think that logically speaking, it can really raise some questions about the character of God who would torture people eternally forever and ever. And that's why people leave the faith. Other people leave the faith because maybe whatever reasons they have. So that doctrine can keep people in the church, but it also can chase people away. So I don't know that necessarily that concludes how people will react to that. But again, I personally believe that that is not a biblical doctrine of eternal hell.
And I don't want to live my life in fear anymore. I don't want other people to live their life in fear anymore. I want us to enjoy the beauty and the wonder and the awe of this reality. I want curiosity. I want meaning that I don't have to inherit. Okay.
I encourage curiosity and asking questions. I'm a very curious person. When I say what is truth, and I have all these playlists called What is Truth that, as I mentioned before, there's all kinds of things to get interested about. There's this passage in Genesis 6 that talks about fallen angels or sons of God coming down and procreating with human women and begot giants, whatever that means. It doesn't say a whole lot more about that, but there's plenty to be curious about when it comes to that, when it comes to UFOs. Like I'm fascinated by all that stuff. And I know that in some church circles, they're like, don't get off on that stuff. But I love talking about that stuff. I'm a very curious person. I'm curious about the history of all, I haven't done a deep dive. I haven't had time to do a deep dive into everything, but I would be fascinated by learning about when any religion began, like who was Buddha? Like, why did he start Buddhism? What did he believe before that? What was where did he get his ideas from? Islam, Muhammad, where did he get his ideas from? Was there a previous thing that he kind of developed? And all the denominations and churches, I'm curious about all that stuff. And so I probably spent more time with the history of denominations and doctrines than I have with other religions. But I do encourage people to ask questions. I would encourage any Christian, to read the Quran and see what it says if they want to know, just to see what they believe, because it's hard to talk and have a conversation with a Muslim and disagree with them if you don't know what they believe. Now, thankfully, there have been people that came out of Islam, became a Christian, so they know exactly what they believe and they're able to relate to them. And there's people that become Christians from all walks of life that understand that walk of life because that's what they used to be, right? And I don't really necessarily feel compelled to have to learn everything about everything, because even though I would love to know everything about everything, there are certain things that I find more important that I focus on. Some people question the shape of the earth, which I don't, but I encourage people to do that, right? I encourage people to question, how do we know evolution is true? How do we know creationism is true? How do we know there any of those are true? Whatever you want to talk about. And it's good to do your own seeking in that sense. Look for truth and not just be indoctrinated. So I would encourage anyone to do that.
A lot of people think the goal of conversations like this is to convert others or, deconvert others. But again, I'm not here to make you think exactly like me. I'm not here to build a new doctrine or replace one belief system with another. I get accused of that all of the time. But I'm telling you, I'm here to liberate people from dogmatic rigidity, from the idea that our worth is tied to how well we conform. Because what we're up against isn't just about, again, faith. All right. I always say that Christian nationalism and religious authoritarianism is not about faith, it is about power. Okay. This is the larger pattern of high.
I would say the true Christianity is about faith, but I agree with what she said that in many cases it's more about control in some circles. So yeah, so I will agree with that to a degree, but I don't think faith and true Christianity is a problem at all, personally. I do think control is a problem.
Hierarchy where the few dominate the many and they call it order. All right. Deconstruction isn't about being right or perfectly rational. It's about being free. That's what I want people to remember. So if you're listening to this and maybe you still believe in God, but you're tired of the Christian conservative environment, or you're agnostic and you're still trying to figure it out, or even if you are an atheist and angry and still healing from religious trauma, this space that I'm trying to create isn't about everyone being the same. It's about solidarity and about building something better together.
And I would also encourage anyone to check out the What is Truth playlists and look at the titles. I mean, there's a lot of videos in there on my channel, and check it out. Just look at, just consider some things, right? Just, ask questions. I encourage that. Because I think the most important thing to know is what is truth. And if the Bible is true, I think it's important that we know what it says and to follow it. Now, if it's not true, and I've said this myself, if the Bible's claims on creation is not true, it would be hard for me to follow that Bible. Now, for some reason, many Christians still believe in evolution, but they also believe the Bible is true, and they just say, well, it's allegorical. And personally, I couldn't do that. And so I would not be a believer in the Bible if I was not convinced that creationism is true. Or that there's scientific proof against it, which there's not. In fact, there's plenty of evidence for the claims in the Bible. But you would have to do that seeking yourself. I can't prove it to anybody. So, but yeah, I definitely encourage the concept of free thinking and searching and being able to ask any question. And yeah.
So if you're listening to this, if you're watching this and you're wondering whether it is safe to start questioning, I want you to know that, you know what? I'm here. This community is here. We have some really awesome people joining in these conversations, and you don't have to stay in the environment you're in just because you were born there. All right. There is life on the other side. There is power in questioning and being skeptical, and you are allowed to begin again, and you are allowed to, become a more authentic version of yourself.
I'm just curious, and I might try to join just to see what happens if they would allow me in it, because I do consider myself a free thinker. Would they allow me to freely think the way I think? And she's making these claims, and if that's the case, then there shouldn't be a problem with a Christian coming in and discussing a lot of these things. So if that's really what they're going for, the question is, are they truth seeking, or are they just speaking out against one particular thing? And if that's the case, then I'll probably get shunned from their group. So maybe I will. Maybe I'll join it and be friendly and be in agreement, just like I have in this video, agreement where there's agreement to be had, which is most of what she said, because a lot of it is corrupt wolves in sheep's clothing and that kind of a thing. So if I go in there with the intent to be agreeable, in the intent to be agreeable, but also to speak up and suggest, what about this and that, and see what happens. You know, are they going to shun me, or are they going to allow free thinkers? So that would be interesting. Maybe I should try that and be a free thinker in their group. And then bring up some of these things and say, hey, you know, I completely am for free thinking. So I want to be a part of this group, right? Maybe I should try that. I think I might.
People who raised me, whether or not they realized it, they were trying to control what I thought. And I'm here to relate to you if that sounds like how you were raised. And when you do unlearn all of these things, I promise that life on the other side is worth it. So I hope you got some value out of this episode of the Kayse Melone Show. Please don't forget to join the Kayse and Friends Discord server to have further conversations like this one. And also tune into the daily broadcast live stream every day at 7 a.m. Central Standard Time on both YouTube and Twitch.
Okay. Okay, so that was that. And I don't know, that might be interesting to go in and join and try to be friendly and be a free thinker, but as a Christian, and see what happens. You know, maybe they will shun me, maybe they'll accept me, and maybe they'll be appreciative of my perspective on some things. But we'll see. I don't know. But what the things she just said, I have some skepticism about, like when she said we encourage free thinking and all that. So I'm going to put that to the test, perhaps, if I have time and energy to do it. But not to go in to raise havoc. That's not what, you know, that would not be fruitful. I want to be as kind and try to be as peaceful as possible from my own perspective. And encourage free thinking and be a part of that group and just see what happens. So if they were to shun me and kick me out, even though I'm doing all those things, then maybe they're not as free thinking as they thought. So we'll see. All right. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.